This is Dr. Goodin. Please like, subscribe, share, comment below as you pause and make a comment when you hear something you like. Tell me. That way I can keep improving, making videos that serve people better, support students and students that aren't even mine. This series is following a conversation I had with a student who just finished data collection, and we're talking about chapters 4 and 5 and sort of what those are going to look like. I said, follow my video playlist where I talk step by step through chapters 4 and 5, but I sort of started to give an overview of what to expect. And because what do you do with teaching? You tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. It's that same thing with teaching. You got to realize your students are human. They're going to forget. And so I even told him, you're going to forget a lot of what I said, even on this phone call. But you're going to get to a point later where you're going to be like, oh, this is what he was talking about on the phone. I remember, and it's kind of sort of shine, a light bulb will appear above your head and it'll be amazing, but you might not remember everything. And that's where you come back and sort of fill in the gaps. Reach out to me again. In that case, I told him, because you're human, and so I want to prepare you as much as possible, but I expect that you're going to forget some of it, and that's okay. So come back to me and we'll talk more. I was talking in the last segment about sort of how you might come across a need to mention new literature. And what I mean by that really is you get into the implications. You've got this expertise. You've presented the results of the study. You've started, and more than started, but you've really started comparing, contrasting against the research you reviewed throughout Chapter 2, the theory you reviewed probably in Chapter 2, in depth. That whole chapter was just, you remember, slogging through it. You didn't understand why. Letting the airplane pass. You didn't understand why. It was, why am I doing all this? It didn't all make sense. Now it's supposed to make sense. Now it's supposed to start clicking, because what I'm having you do is go back and compare the research articles, what they suggested, what they found. Does that match up with what your study found? Does what the theory suggested would happen, is that what happened in your findings? And then you get into the implications section of your chapter 5, and you start to think big picture. Here's what this means. And his study was about black fathers interacting with their children. And you might say, well, it's a matter of cognitive dissonance. You might sort of think higher order, where you hearken back to a theory that you haven't even mentioned. It's not your guiding framework. But you might say, I think what they're experiencing is this concept I'm familiar with called cognitive dissonance, or whatever concept is appropriate in your study, whatever you think, however you can explain it. Maybe it's a model. Maybe it has to do with Bronfenbrenner, or maybe it has to do with Maslow, or maybe it has to do with Freud. I don't know. That's an interesting study, probably. So what is it? And if it sort of, you try to explain the findings and what you think happened. Explain anything surprising. Explain anything that's different. Any sort of outlier situations. Explain the data as a whole. You're going to get into implications for future research, implications for practice, but it helps to sort of, what you're also doing with any dissertation is you're taking a framework, and you're not only using the framework to use as a lens by which to view your data as it comes in, but you also have sort of this reciprocal service that you're providing to the theorist and to the theory, saying the theory needs to be elaborated upon. It needs to be strengthened. It needs to be extended. And so what are you going to do? You're going to look back at the theory and say, well, the theory I used was maybe, I don't know, cognitive behavioral theory, which is more of a therapeutic theory, but let's say you use that. Well, what do your findings add to that theory? What have you learned about that theory that maybe should be taken into account as any in future studies that use that theory? How have you built on that theory, added to the body of knowledge surrounding that theory, and been part of not just collecting data and not just sort of adding to the body of research commentary, but what about the theoretical commentary and knowledge of how the theory works in real world applications and empirical research. And so as you have these sort of theoretical understandings, you may bring in new theoretical insights, even from outside theories or from your own mind, where you say, I think it's like the best way for me to describe, I think, what I experienced as I listened to these interviews was that this is happening. And you sort of explain it, and sometimes it helps to draw a graphic or create a graphic. Sometimes you come up with your own sort of theoretical opinions and foundations, emerging theories and frameworks that you might get from your study that builds on, it could build on the theory that you used as a framework or another theory, or it could sort of be the beginning of creating sort of a new theory because it wasn't explained well. What you're finding isn't theoretically aligned with maybe a previous theory. And so in that case, if it's straight out of your mind, you're not going to have a citation for it. But if it's pulling in, oh, this reminds me of cognitive dissonance, I think that's what's going on here. And you pull in some research on cognitive dissonance, even though in chapter 2 you didn't review literature about cognitive dissonance because you didn't think it was relevant. And that's okay. You didn't see that coming. You're going to have new insights and what I would call reflections after you finally see the data, start reviewing the data, evaluating it, comparing it to previous research and theory, and sort of seeing how everything fits together. Now that you reflect, you might realize, oh, this thing really helps to explain what was going on. It's an issue of cognitive dissonance, or it's an issue of some other completely different theory. And then you'd want to incorporate literature that you didn't have maybe in chapter 2. You'd want to pull that into a chapter 5 discussion to where you're actually adding a little bit of new literature, but to serve the purpose of explaining why you think the findings occurred the way they do and the implications that you feel that they have. So that's my talk for today. Please come back, like, subscribe, share, comment below if you have any thoughts, ideas. Thank you so much. Go forth and become a doctor. Take care.